Good evening. You're watching Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. Welcome back, Dave. You've been
Thank you.
out a bit lately. We've got a few things to talk about today. It's hard to even know how to narrow it down since we're doing three topics in depth these days. But I want to start with Dark Brandon. He's apparently with his long string of wins, which continues, price of oil's continuing to drop. He's got wins in Congress. He's gotten bills passed. The economy is looking pretty good. It doesn't look like it's actually well, it is overheating. We know that, and they're trying. But it does look like the interest rate increases are starting to take a little bit of effect, but may not drop us into a recession if we hit the sweet spot. So a lot of stuff going on. He's got the war in Ukraine. It looks like the Ukrainians are a lot's going to be riding on this, but are involved in a counter offensive measure, probably their first one since pushing Russians away from Kyiv. But the attempt to retake Kherson after receiving all kinds of aid from the United States, including the HIMARS, long-range, very accurate rockets that could be considered missiles, attacks in Crimea. So that could, if that does lead to something in negotiations, that could lead, to an end to the war. It's hard to say. It might be a ways down the road, but things have been looking pretty good for Biden. It's hard to criticize much of what he's been doing lately. He's on a winning streak, and he seems to feel like with his approval ratings, they're back up to about an average, I think, of about 44%. They were down in the 30s before. A couple of them have them as high as 47 or 48%. It depends on what that's meaning. He is going to Pennsylvania, to Ohio, to Wisconsin, to Arizona, wherever the Democrats have a chance, they're going. And Charlie Crist, with enthusiasm in an interview, when asked, would you want Biden to come down and campaign for it? He said, absolutely, no doubt I want him to come down. So the Democrats must be reading something in the polling or in their data to suggest that this is a good, effective thing to do, because I was expecting him to just basically stay hidden through this thing and so that they could avoid him. But it looks like he's on a tour to try to help with the Senate, maybe even the House. Dave, what do you got to say about this?
Yeah, so it's I think there's a lot of different angles on this prism, so to speak, different ways to look at it. But the biggest picture, the 30,000-foot view, is that we are around in third, headed towards home. There's less than 90 days until the election, and any of the strategies, any of the economic metrics, any data-wise, any of the foreign policy successes, failures, criticisms, they're all starting. The narrative is starting to solidify. And so the I'm projecting and guessing, but the communications team is thinking to themselves that they've got enough of a track record on the policy side of things that they could say and talk about. They've got, to a certain extent, at least a stalemate in Ukraine-Russia conflict. So there's good news there in the sense that there's not bad news.
Right.
But also the economy itself. We've seen prices start to come down. June to July was the first month in a long time since housing prices started to come down. The Federal Reserve, they just had their Aspen Institute economic forum where Federal Reserve Chair came out and said we are going to be persistent and consistent with raising rates until we hit this 2% target, or at least that's what they're projecting, which means that they're going to cause pain and lower inflation, as they're committed to it. And so, there's other lanes, other threads, but bottom line is that they're starting to pull all these pieces together. And then you're the way you originally framed this question is, hey, like, is it what does it mean going into these battleground states, Biden going out and campaigning for the Senate? I think that's just as surface as it gets it's transparent as it gets, and that they see a degree of blood in the water with those poor candidates, controversial candidates that have tied themselves to Trump's mast and their popularity is slipping, and their absurdity is amplifying. So the Senate really does seem more than just in play, but actually starting to look likely. It's a different story in the House, but we could talk about that. We're going to talk about that in our next session.
We will talk about that in the next session. But the point is that, just a month ago, he was down in the mid-30s, lower than Trump was for most of his presidency. He's now up there. And the question is, so I didn't think he would actually be helpful to these Senate candidates. I thought maybe it actually would hurt for them to be able to associate with him, because as we discussed on the show, there was a disconnect between the support for the Democratic candidates and the low Biden rating. But a lot of times people, we forget that people have different reasons for not favoring a president. A lot of Democrats were disappointed that he wasn't getting his agenda done, which is quite different from the negative, approval coming from MAGA or even other Republicans, at that time, because and he finally passed this. And one of the things I believe he's really needs to push, I don't know if he's got plans to do this, but First Solar, which already has 2 solar panel plants in Ohio, because of the remnants of Build Back Better, the Inflation Reduction Act, as everybody is misnaming it, they're going to actually build another plant, a third plant, somewhere in the southeast. I'm thinking Georgia, right? I mean, it's so he's got something there to tout. American jobs, because the way it's written, these panels have to be made in America. They have to be staying there. Alternative technology. It's got something to sell to everybody. And in red states, no doubt, Ohio and somewhere in the South, means that that alternative energy is going to become, that Southern jobs are going to be vested in a sustainable energy policy. So he's really got a lot to tout, and he's going out there doing it. And I thought maybe some of these other Senate candidates were going to resent it, but no, they want him there. Apparently, whatever they're reading, they're energized. And between that and everything else that we've talked about, the Dobbs decision and everything else. Which I did see that younger people are now more motivated to vote. There's a poll indicated that their motivation of young people under 25 who feel strongly motivated to vote has like doubled since March, and they're registering to vote. I mean, we will talk about the House in the second half. I don't think it's a lost cause for the Democrats, but it is a different story. But we'll talk about that. But yeah, it seems to be a revival of his presidency. I'm not going to go so far as to say he's going to run for a second term, but he does seem to be, reclaiming that energy he had when he first came in.
So 2 things. Firstly, I think it's kind of funny that we're talking about 2024, because reality, this is 2022. But he did say he's going to run. Amy Klobuchar, as recently as Friday, said that she was confident he was going to run, and we'll see. That's another story.
But I think they have to say that. I think no matter what, they have to. It's obligatory.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But so you touched on a couple things that are worth mentioning and highlighting. One is the abortion climate after the Supreme Court decision. Sort of across the political spectrum, concessions and awareness have been made that the Republicans overplay their hand. They're like the dog that caught the car, and now they're trying to ban everything. There's like 13 states that have really over the top extreme abortion ban policies in place, and another 13 or so that are in the works. So half the country is starting to really realize that this, the consensus, the approximate 2/3 consensus around abortion access being limited but real. You've got a situation where the electoral politics are hurting Republicans in the big picture, and then on a state-by-state basis, depends on how competitive those states are. But anyway, it's motivating people. And one thing which I think is worth mentioning here too is not to forget, if you get somebody who's never voted before to vote, then you get a +1. You got one person off the couch. But if you get someone from the other party to switch parties and vote for you, that's a 2-point swing. And the average change in a off year is about, I think, 7.9%. If that's
right.
Don't
Yeah.
quote me on it, but it's around that number. So if you are pulling some Republicans, you're really getting a bigger hit. It's marginally a more impactful, persuasive technique and so that partially explains why Biden gave that speech, that law and order speech the other day. Because
right. Well, not only that, because Republicans, I think, really miscalculated when they attacked. I mean, we talked about this. I already talked about it with Aaron, maybe, but we talked about how Republicans went out half caught. I mean, McCarthy talking about how he's going to drag Garland in, get ready to be, investigated about this, but the thin blue line just went out the window. I mean, in terms of the Republicans, and today Biden is hammering them on that point, saying anybody who is not coming out and condemning these attacks on the FBI is dangerous, and not. I mean, he's hitting them hard on it, and he's going to be going to Wisconsin. The Democrats are also putting up gay marriage as on a federal to protect that statewide, because nationwide, because they're concerned about the next ruling to overturn, and they probably are going to put up a national support for abortions for rape and incest, maybe even separately. I mean, or for real bad medical conditions. And each time, somebody like Ron Johnson, who's in a purple state, is in a bind, and he's already in trouble.
So there were two things you mentioned I wanted to touch on. One was abortion, which is a cultural issue, and the other was the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really it's a spending bill and a tax increase that advances green energy and development. It's one of the most sort of progressive, balanced, pro-business green bills that was possible in our current climate. So whether it's
48 Democrats.
Right. But lots of this money and lots of this advantage is going to businesses. A very small percentage of businesses are going to be impaired by the tax changes. There aren't that many businesses that pay zero taxes.
Right.
And that are $1 billion or more. So in a way, there's a degree of equity here that when you raise taxes on people that have thousands of lobbyists at their disposal to bend the tax code in their direction. I know this is kind of inside baseball, but small businesses, medium-sized businesses, they pay their taxes. And to know that the big guy who could kind of crowd them out of the market is getting, some degree of accountability, that's not just happening nationally. That's actually a new international norm that our country is trying to help institutionalize across the globe, minimum taxes. But so anyway, what I'm getting at is that this, for people that are, whether you're a business person or an economics wonk or a green energy person or anybody who just wants some degree of hope and optimism about the future, there are elements in this bill. There is actual progress. At the same time, it didn't come at the expense of endorsing far progressive opinions or policies, socialist policies, communist policies, any of the things that Republicans could easily throw Molotov cocktails at and say, look, these people, we should just burn down all these progressive ideas. No, these are very moderate ideas.
They were trying to do it.
It's a bit of a victory lap, I think.
Yeah, they were trying to do that, but they backed off it pretty quickly because I think they checked their focus groups or whatever, and they're saying that's not socialist, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And one other sort of progressive idea that was instituted in a very moderate way, but that will have benefits, again, marginal benefits, but decent benefits when it comes to Biden's reemergence as someone who's off the mat as one of the least popular people in the country, is the debt forgiveness for people in students, community colleges, skills training, anybody that got a Pell Grant. So if it, is going to be eligible for up to $20,000 of debt relief. That's not an insignificant boost to people's lives and well-being. So all of this, and not to just keep going off on this, but all of this in the context of very bad news for Trump when it comes to, sort of criminal liability, January 6th committee hearings. There's just a drip of bad news for Trump, and his supporters seem to be, increasingly radicalized, which marginalizes them in the eyes of moderates even more.
Yeah. At first, there were some middle of the road people saying, "Oh, the FBI has gone too far." But I think that photograph today, that we'll talk a little bit about more later, that the DOJ released as they were as part of their objection to Trump's call, for the special master. I mean, it's that visual is just going to put them. And Coulter believes that Trump is through as a political force, but he still has the stranglehold on the party. He may be going down, but he's still able to take the party down with him. Mitch McConnell's been kind of forced to back off of his statement a little bit, saying he's got faith in Oz, which, everybody knows he doesn't. He's got faith in Oz, but the RNC, meanwhile, has pulled their money out of Pennsylvania. They've given it up as a lost cause, so.
So they don't get too many of those. There's only about 4 seats I think we talked about that they really that are in play. Or if the Democrats can get 4 of the 6, then that's probably enough.
Yeah, well, and they got to defend seats now too. So we'll talk more about the Senate. We've been talking a lot about the Senate, but we're going to take on a different issue in the next segment.
I think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
All right, we've talked a lot about the Senate. We haven't talked a lot about the House, and it's really hard to talk about the House because you're talking about almost 500 races as opposed to 50, or actually not even 50, 30 in any given election, and usually only about 5 or 6 that matter, right? Races that are going to be of consequence. Well, it's harder to talk about the House and predict the House because you've got races all over the country. But it's easier these days because, unfortunately, with all of the gerrymandering by both parties, actually, but mostly by the Republicans, most of the races are not competitive. I think we're down to, Cook report, I looked at it today, I think they've got like about 40 races that are competitive, possibly competitive. And by that, I'm actually saying toss-ups to lean or likely Democrat, as where there is a chance. And so people are asking, well, gosh, if things are going so well for the Senate, for the Democrats with the Senate, or they appear to be, we'll see what actually happens. Why not the House? Why does 538 give the Democrats, I think at their highest point, 68, right now 67 out of 100 chance of winning the Senate, but the House only 23, maybe it's gotten up to 25. And the things you have to understand is first of all, it doesn't take much of a shift at all. There are only 4 House majority. I forgot to mention, make that 5. There's as of today, this is probably one of the biggest upsets in recent history. But Democrat Mary Peltola, who is I'm not sure how to pronounce her indigenous community, so I'm not going to try, but she is indigenous. She is it has pulled an upset win over Sarah Palin, who is trying to make a comeback into politics in this very red state of Alaska. But and we'll be analyzing that over the time. But a lot of people are saying she had a chance. Now, Palin is a very bad candidate, not just for the reasons we all know, but the fact that she quit as governor to be on reality television had to leave a bad taste in some mouths, even Republicans there, right? But also we've got this.
Let's just mention she's still highly unqualified, and when she speaks, I think time has passed her by. She's less popular. She's less informed. She's just not a good candidate.
But I also think that Patola got a real good turnout from the Native community there, and I'm going to try to say it. Yupik. I hope I didn't butcher that, indigenous community. And she's been the executive director of the Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission. So she is not a radical, she's not a Bernie Sanders progressive, but she's a bona fide progressive. She's actually got some good issues here. And they also have now ranked choice voting in Alaska, which allows you to vote for the candidate of your preference. And, and anyways, we've talked about that. So there are a lot of factors that allowed her to win. And this is only going to last till the end of the year, by the way. This was a special election to replace a deceased Republican person who had this is the Alaska sole House seat. But this is yet another sign. This is an indication that, well, if there's not going to be a blue wave, at least that there's not that the red wave is going to be blunted. But we have the structural advantage that the Republicans have. Even before this census, they of all of the in the 16 to 17 states that they've gerrymandered since 2010. Actually, they started it way back in 2001 with Tom DeLay's campaign. But they only have a 5 person majority. It just doesn't take much to shift to take that away. And if you look at all the toss-ups, I believe they're Cook rates 8 toss-ups in the Republican that are Republican incumbent, and about 20 of them that are Democrats, right?
Yeah.
So assuming you go 50-50 there, you've already, you flip a coin for each of those toss-ups. You've already got the Republicans statistically getting enough to take it. But again, we've got this row factor. You know?
So I think it's important to say, firstly, you mentioned some specificity about Cook report. I'll just throw out the 538 number. It's a little bit older of an article, but it had 50 potential states where anything might change, the top 50. And of those, about 12 of them are Republican leaning and the rest Democratic. So it's really going to be razor thin, potentially, if the Democrats are able to hold on. But that's less important, I think, than just because what we're talking about is it even possible? And so if you look at since 1994, I think that's when the modern people are saying the modern, the Newt Gingrich era, whatever, sort of kicked in, or you can go all the way back to Eisenhower, I think, when Eisenhower took over after World War II. So depending on where you cut it, where you start tracking the trends, it's almost always the case that the president's party loses seats. And there's
we've talked about that, but there are a lot of exceptions to that rule too.
Yes,
not a lot, a few.
Right, and in the modern era, there's 2, and so that's you read my mind. One was George Bush, the year after September 11th, where there was a larger national issue at play, a national crisis, so to speak.
Yes.
And I think Bill Clinton. But anyway, so the bottom line here, though, is if there is an extraordinary national issue, then that could be an influencer on people's commitment to turn out. So we could, I'll make my case right now here real quick. I'll just cut to the chase. So right now, typically when you ask people what is the most important issue to them, it's almost always the economy or it's economics related. But in just the last few weeks in polling, that's shifted to democracy itself. So there's some messaging that is working. There's some awareness of Trump and MAGA and his allies. There's a broader people are starting to understand that there's some things that are more important than how I feel about my pocketbook. even if that's like changes and it goes 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, if economy is 1 or 2 and democracy itself is even remotely near the top, that means I think we are at an extraordinary moment. And I feel like my perception is that that's going to get hammered home quite a bit. And you compound that with Roe, like we talked about, that just there's, it's a right track, wrong track thing. If the president is on the wrong track, people want to switch parties, or people are more inspired. The opposition to the sitting president is more inspired. There's like 3 theories on why people would vote, but the big one here, I think, is if you give people a reason to participate, they'll participate. And my sense is that those reasons are out there, and that it could continue, even though it's only like a 1 in 4 chance right now. It could continue to inch towards parity.
It could.
Weeks.
It could. I mean, and my prediction, I'm not sure which week I did it, but recently I predicted that California is actually going to pick up 3 seats for the Democrats. That's an exception. We've got an exceptional situation here, but Florida will probably make that a wash, because Florida has some of the most draconian gerrymandering that DeSantis pushed through at the last minute. They gave him 4 extra seats, and none of that can be challenged until after this election. It may, and same thing with Ohio. They ran out the clock there, I believe. I mean, there's a bunch of other states, and then just throughout the South, we've got where African Americans represent 30% of the vote, and they're like represent 1 out of 7 of the districts in Alabama. A similar thing in New Orleans. They've got a snake between that just runs through all of the African American communities to make sure they're contained as much as possible into one. So and so it's hard to get around that. But like I said, we don't know what the impact is of these new voters coming in, and where they're registering to vote, and how they're doing it. And the Republicans are struggling. They're trying to come up with a national message about abortion. But some of the anti-abortion are so kicked in, caught up in their own rhetoric about it being a murder. They don't want that to ease up, and that puts them in a similar bind as they are with the Trump people. They've got Trump is calling for extremity in all different ways, but they've got to moderate. But in recent years, we've noticed that Republicans in presidential elections don't moderate after they win their nominations. Even McCain didn't even do that. They still hit right because they need to get the turnout from their people because of the way it's structured. So it's hard to say, but, as to whether or not the Democrats. I do say the Democrats have a chance of it. Of holding on to it, but you look at some House races. There's also, now I don't know, maybe it's changed back around, but about a month ago in Rhode Island, there was a district where there's now a vacant spot, and the Republican was ahead. It's a moderate Republican, pro-choice Republican, but was ahead in the polls because people were unhappy with the economy. But when the economy becomes less of an issue, even if you're still kind of hurting, but it's not as much of an issue, people are smart enough to realize, well, the loss of choice or the law or other impacts of the Supreme Court, that's much longer term. The economy, inflation's not, we know that's cyclical. It's not going to be around forever. The economy will get better at a certain point, but we could permanently, or at least, for decades, lose rights that we've held precious. The right to marry who you want, even the exclusionary rule for criminal. For civil rights violations and civil liberties violations and criminal stuff. They're talking about getting rid of the exclusionary rule and Miranda, and all of that is in danger. And people might start thinking about that if they aren't in as much economic pain, and we'll see.
So based on the set of issues that you just described and that I described earlier that are in play, that are controversial, any given person's going to have their own sensitivities to this. And like I said, and not to use this term too much, but really it's going to come down to the margins. It's going to come down to, individual voters in many cases. 538 did an analysis where they thought that as long as the Republicans win the national popular vote when it comes to Congress, if you add up all the congressional races across history, compare them to the expectations for the congressional races now, it varies depending on the year, et cetera.
Right.
But they're saying if Republicans can win by even as little as 0.2%, they'll be fine. They'll be able to hold the gerrymandered districts. They'll be able to take the majority. That number, right now, I just checked, it's 3.3% nationwide Republican advantage over Democrats, all things being
Depends
equal.
on the poll, but yeah.
Well, this is the 538 analysis.
Average. Well,
Average. Yep. And it's coming down. It's come down about half. It was about twice as big just a few months ago. So at its current pace with 3 months to go, and we're going to talk about January 6th committee hearings. As more and more of these things come out, it's very possible that gap will continue to close at the pace, maybe accelerated pace, and it's going to come. I believe anyway, it's going to come real close. Just based on the good news, bad news, good direction, right direction, wrong direction, all those macro issues are going to apparently come into alignment right around the time that we have to choose.
The problem the Democrats have, though, is given the gerrymander, the Republicans can have fewer than half the votes. They can actually lose the popular vote and still win Congress because of the way it's structured. They don't need to actually have the popular vote. If they do win the popular vote, they probably have it all but guaranteed, but they could probably afford to come in a point or two below and still win. Maybe that used to be true. Maybe that's not true this time.
So that's the other thing, actually. Not to I know that speaking to the average person on the street or anecdotal evidence is not the same thing as thoughtful, analysis. But I was just recently in Florida, and so I always take that opportunity to speak to conservative Republicans and progressive liberals and everybody in between. I think Florida is one of those bellwether states where it can go any given way in any given year. Even Christ, right? He was a Republican governor, and now he's a Democratic candidate, right? So candidates themselves will switch depending. So DeSantis, his authoritativeness and his look, we don't want to be told what to do. His liberty and freedom bona fides are solid. People respect that. But much beyond that, he shoots from the hip, and he's got 1 foot sort of in MAGA universe, if not a foot and a half, right? And so that when you contrast that with assaults on gender equality, the attack on Disney for woke companies, and that's it just shows that he's a reactionary who is comfortable in culture wars. He's a very smart guy. I'm not impugning him in that sense.
But he's made mistakes on that. The book burning, the book banning in school districts and libraries has become an issue too. That's backlash going against him because that undercuts his libertarian theme.
Exactly. And so I think he's, amongst the moderates, amongst those people that are going to be the ones who ultimately decide. Some of them cross over, Republican or Democrat, depending on the year. Those are the folks. That's like a double. Like I said, if you get people to cross over, you're taking one away from the other party. So it's not just mobilizing your base. I wish me and you could say this till we're blue in the face. There's more in America to getting elected than mobilizing the base. There's actually exhibiting leadership. And so the question is, what I think Florida kind of shows that we're not stuck where we were when Virginia Governor Youngkin, he got elected. There was an understanding about the culture wars that Democrats were doomed and that the liberty vote was going to be prevailing. But that's,
we'll see.
It's swung quite a bit. I believe
CRT isn't quite the issue it was back with Virginia, with the Virginia governor's race. We'll have to talk about this more, and we'll have to talk about the fact that the Democrats are actually now pouring money into Florida because they see chance there, not just with DeSantis, but with Rubio. They're giving money to Demings and Christ, who are being very spirited in their campaigns right now. But you probably saw a little of that. So.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I went there, because it's heated up quite a bit.
Just now, the Justice Department has filed a motion in the Southern District of Florida to unseal a search warrant and property receipt relating to a court-approved search that the FBI conducted earlier this week. That search was of premises located in Florida belonging to the former president. The department did not make any public statements on the day of the search. The former president publicly confirmed the search that evening, as is his right. Faithful adherence to the rule of law is the bedrock principle of the Justice Department and of our democracy. Upholding the rule of law means applying the law evenly, without fear or favor. Under my watch, that is precisely what the Justice Department is doing.
Okay, well, we have January 6th. What is it, season 3 or 2.3? I don't know what we're on right now. It's coming back. We'll talk about that in a minute, but also I wanted to, they're kind of related. I think we shouldn't conflate the raid of Mar-a-Lago with the January 6th, because they're two very different things. The Department of Justice has got them completely segregated, but we've been talking a lot about that lately. And with that photo that came out today, I think Republicans are now running scared. You've got Kristi Noem, who obviously can get reelected on doing anything up there, reverting back along with Trump to the FBI might have planted some of these top secret documents there, right? I mean, but that's not going to fly. And the photographs, the actual eyesight of these documents labeled top secret, and when it becomes discussed that possibly human resource intelligence people, that means like our spies, whether or not they're Americans disguised or whether or not they're foreign nationals who are working for us, are compromised potentially. That's a big deal. And as we said, Biden is right now on tour attacking the Republicans, particularly those who are either attacking the FBI or not aggressively countering the very potentially deadly rhetoric that some of the Republicans are pushing. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get to what we're going to expect for the January 6th hearing. Real quick news in that. Ornato, the guy who may or may not have told the story about the fight he has resigned or has left. We don't know the whole story about that. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit. I don't want to take the whole time up talking about Mar-a-Lago, but those are issues that are so big that they're having an impact on the campaign now. Biden is charged up. The Democrats are charged up. Republicans scrambling for a message. Senator Graham is back to, you can't prosecute him because there'll be riots in the streets. I mean, hardly a legal defense, but anyway.
So I think you hit the nail on the head with that last comment that it's not a legal defense. And in fact, almost all of the diversionary tactics and media press releases coming out of the Trump camp have not been legal arguments. They have been purely cover and political stoking of this sort of us versus them narrative, when in fact, we now know that this document exchange dialogue has been going on since before Trump even left the White House. And they've been working, the National Archives has been working with them. Now, I don't want to belabor all this, but right. the idea is that what's the bottom line? So we know of all these top secret, and confidential documents that Trump basically said, they're mine. I'm not gonna I'm not going to give them back. Oh, I'll give back some. I'm not going to give back others. Oh, we gave everything back. Oh, we'll just keep it locked up in secured places. But it turns out things were not locked up in secured places. They were where they felt like keeping them, and they weren't all given back, and they weren't acting in good faith. And so there was, at some point, the rule of law was in question, and the Justice Department decided to take action. So the question is, I listened to, I'm looking up his name right now so I don't get it wrong, National Security Lawyer Bradley Moss. I listened to him. He's out there. You could get his own take on this, get his own words on the all the context and all the background on this. But net, he basically said that Trump will be charged because
they don't have any choice.
Yeah,
it's got to happen. Yeah.
Classified documents that aren't supposed to leave secured rooms aren't supposed to leave secured rooms. End of story. So then the question is, what do you do about it? And it's not, we're not saying, I'm not saying, and I'm not putting words in his mouth that he's saying Trump's going to be punished. There's a difference between being punished and being charged. Chances are very serious charges will come out. Even Attorney General Garland said, look, we don't like to do this in public. Our practice is always to do this in private, but there's just too much at stake. Yeah. So this is an extraordinary time because of the threats to civility and the threats to stability. But net, they're going to, this expert that I heard, and I trust his judgment. He did say that he's so guilty, and it's so obvious that this just has to play out now at this point.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, we're going to have a lot more to talk about that, but yeah, I don't see that they have a choice. They've got to charge, or this is a real bad precedent. But January 6th is coming back. Kinzinger was on, I think, Face the Nation or Meet the Press, one of the Sunday morning shows, and basically said, this portion of the hearings is going to talk about where the money went, and where the money was spent, or the cash and the cover-up, and talk a lot about what was done, and including they're very upset still about those text messages that just disappeared. Right? I mean, that doesn't happen by accident, and they don't routinely delete them that way. There's been all kinds of lies. We noticed that, as I said, Ornato has left, but I'm suspecting there's going to be others as well. They've accused the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General staff for appearing to engage in a cover-up. This may go beyond Trump a little bit, and some of the Republicans who've been saying, well, why weren't the National Guard there, blah, blah, blah. They may get some answers, and they may not like what those answers are.
Yeah. So again, I like that you pointed out that there's two things that we heard over the weekend, and you mentioned a lot about the second one. I'll go to the first one, the money. So the first I don't know, 6 of the hearings that we heard, I think that was the number from the January 6th committee. They kind of wrapped up the last round with about an hour and a half of just making it patently obvious. By the end of the last session, they made it patently obvious that, Trump, his entire legal team, all of his advisors, everybody who was on White House staff, other than his core group of sycophants, knew that the election there was no fraud, it was not stolen, that no judges, no evidence at no time ever was there anything remotely related to a fact that there was an issue with elections, period, hard stop. So the next phase where they talk about the Stop the Steal grift, the economic enterprise of raising millions of dollars, Representative Kinzinger said those were lies and fraud and theft. And any people that you marketed to and tried to collect money from in the name of stopping the steal and helping Trump fight that fight was all fraud and lies and theft. And so I think they're going to try to spell that out and in effect maybe not embarrass the Justice Department into action or encourage, we'll say, the Justice Department into action, but just debase and demoralize people who continue to not pay attention and buy in.
Now, there's also some investigators went to Copenhagen, Denmark, to view some documentary footage that didn't make it into the documentary pertaining to Roger Stone. And apparently that's going to figure into these hearings somehow. I mean, again, we don't have a lot of real clear preview here. And of course, this is all timed. You mentioned actually we're under 90 days. We're actually pretty close to 60 days to the election. Yeah. I don't know if we should just label this Cheney's last word, Cheney and Kinzinger's last word hearings, but she's got nothing to lose now. Of course, she hasn't acted like she's had anything to lose for a long time, yeah, we don't know, why were the text, what happened to the text messages. That there's going to be some discussion about that.
Yeah.
And they may revisit again on that day, why wasn't there adequate security? And of course, the Republicans, some of them have wanted to blame Pelosi and the Capitol Police, for not being out there with their shields and batons, but there was all this talk about the optics, but this is a Trump rally. These are white people. I didn't say that, but these are mostly white people who are, we can't treat this like a Black Lives Matter thing. That would just be bad for optics, and we look like we're biased, right? And that's what everybody is afraid here is, just like we're talking about with whether or not they prosecute in with regard to the Mar-a-Lago raid. It's like, well, do we want to divide the country so much? Do we want to take a chance that the MAGA people are going to go crazy? The MAGA people they're going to go crazy no matter what. You gotta, there's some of them will. Maybe some of them will be convinced around this, but this is about to start up again, and to the degree that this election is about Trump. We've discussed the Senate and the House. If once again, Mitch McConnell is probably very angry because if the Republicans don't take the House and don't take the Senate and actually lose ground in one or both of those, a lot of that could be hung on Trump's into his lap.
Absolutely, and I think that's already, we're starting to hear that already. That's why the money's gotten pulled back from some of these Trump preferred candidates who have very limited chances of winning, and that's why people are actually going out there and starting to. There's battle lines, kind of, I guess, between MAGA folks and more traditional conservatives about how they're going to frame conservative principles publicly. But I think I just want to go back to what you said, because I talked to the first point about basically what I didn't talk about that you mentioned was the lack of National Guard showing up and the potential collusion with Homeland Security's data retention policy decisions. Kissinger did make it clear that those are directions that they want to go into, and he did say that he believed that they would be able to advance the Americans' understanding of what actually happened. Maybe we don't want to impugn the Army leadership that possibly intervened. According to the lawyer for the head of the Washington, D.C. National Guard, the Army did intervene on behalf of Trump, but that's to be determined. That's public knowledge. I saw that in Washington Post. That stuff may not actually get fully resolved. Also, Homeland Security / Secret Service data retention, that stuff might not get fully resolved, but they will at least try to go down that road of making it clear that Trump made those attempts, and that the Trump network and that the Trump closest allies to him did reach out and try to get extraordinary support to advance their goals. So that might just be enough to continue to taint his historic reputation and potentially push him out of the box for consideration for 2024.
What do they do for 2022? I mean, when this January 6th hearing fires up, and McCarthy already went out, and made a mistake with regard to Mar-a-Lago, the Mitch McConnell he's smarter than that. He actually reserved. He didn't say anything until too late. So some of the smarter people in the Republican Party knew not to go out on that because they know they're going to be hit with it later and the rest. But I'm wondering if there's going to be a changing attitude at all toward with regard to the January 6th committee hearing if this stuff comes out. But see, they've got a problem because they hate the fact that MAGA's got so much of an influence, but they need those voters. They're in that bind. They need those. The crazy people to turn out, and they didn't turn out in 2018. So it's going to be very hard to get them to turn out. They're trying to use abortion for their issues on this. DeSantis and Rubio were saying, they're going to be fired up. Republicans are going to be fired up over the Mar-a-Lago raid. It's not panning out so much. Right. So how do the Republicans, that other than Cheney and Kinzinger and a handful of others, how do they respond? How are they going to handle this January 6th meetings over the next few weeks?
So I think you and I talked about this off and on throughout, where it's a question of processing the data, cause and effect, right? Actions have consequences, actions have reactions. And so, not to get super wonky on us, but Hegel, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? Or right. The other way around, right? So people who are what I mean by that is people who are Republicans who used to be conservative are now MAGA. They're going to end up conservative again, non-MAGA. The question is, how long is it going to take? Yeah. And the political elected folks can't be, well, not that they can't, because we've got 2 in the House and maybe a couple in the Senate, maybe. But it really can't be them, because for them, every time they open their mouth, it's an existential threat to their status quo. But what people like Cheney are doing and Kinzinger, they're clearing the lane. They're making it possible for other people to fill the void. And like I said, Cheney, I said in another previous conversation, Cheney's family has the ultimate in street cred with the military. And if Cheney and her father stand up and point at evidence that shows that there was someone trying to politically influence our own military to hold the National Guard in D.C. back from maintaining the defense of the Capitol. That the word that they're using there is a dereliction of duty. I think, not to cut to the conclusion here, but I think that they're trying to make the case that there's a dereliction of duty, and so the Republicans will eventually need to step back in line, or they'll miss their opportunity to do so.
All right. Well, we'll be talking about that more probably next week. So, but in the meantime, that is the closing of that segment. All right. Well, we're at our time for predictions. Dave, what have you got for us?
Well, I'm going to keep mine short and sweet. I think based on the evidence photo that we saw today across the national news, that there were documents that were illegally in possession of the former president, that those charges are coming.
Okay, well, it's just hard to see how he can't do it, but we will see. All right, I am going to make yet another election prediction. I'm going to try to make them as we're going along here, but the easy one, the first half, is that crazy retired Army General Don Bolduc he's got the lead. He's going to have the Republican nomination in New Hampshire. New Hampshire was yet another one of these states that was a possibility. They have a weak Hassan was a weak candidate. Had they managed to get Sununu to run, but Sununu doesn't want anything to do with the National Party right now, they would have had a Republican senator there. But they instead they're down to these goofy people, and Bolduc is a full-on Trumper, conspiracy theorist, borderline QAnon person. So I am now predicting that Hassan will retain the seat. The Democrats will retain it in New Hampshire. That brings us down to the only real flip possibility I see for the Republicans, unless they turn around in Georgia, is Nevada.
Ohio.
No, Ohio's already Democrat, so it's already Republican. That's not a flip. So, So, but Nevada, I think that's their best shot at this point in time. I don't think it's going to happen in Colorado or Arizona. We will talk more about Nevada in the future, but I think the chances are narrowing, and you won't see any RNC money going to New Hampshire after this primary. All right. Well, that takes us to an end of another episode. We will be back again next week. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.